We're glad to have you here and excited to continue exploring timely topics that are shaping the future of work and leadership. As part of the series, we continue building on these conversations in future sessions, including our next webinar in May called Strategies for Times of Change. But today we're focusing on topics that is already transforming how organizations operate and lead. Today's session, AI and Leadership Preparing for Future Work, looks at how artificial intelligence influence leaderships, decision-making, and team dynamics. As AI continues to evolve, leaders are being challenged to think differently about how to guide their teams, adapt new technologies, and balance innovation with human-centered leaderships. It is my pleasure today to introduce instructor Alex Gabby. Alex brings more than 30 years of experience across entrepreneurships, business strategies, and operations, and has launched six startups across a range of industries. He also has over 18 years of teaching experience here at the University of Texas at Austin, where he focuses on entrepreneurship, strategy, and marketing, and has been recognized multiple times for teaching excellence. We're excited to have him here with us today. With that, I'll just leave it over to you, Alex.
Awesome. Thanks, Dom. Yeah, so as Dom mentioned, I'm an associate professor at the McCombs School of Business with focus areas in supply chain, technology, marketing, and entrepreneurship. And I have a long history of work in the technology space, both in startups and large semiconductor companies, and currently have another startup that I'm running in addition to my teaching responsibilities, as well as being the executive director of a nonprofit. So I live and breathe artificial intelligence and technology in a much more practical way and apply it every day in the work that I do across the board. So I'm excited to be here with you today to spend the next 45 minutes or so going through sort of a whirlwind view of how AI and leadership intersect. So I'm very glad you're here. My focus is going to be to make this discussion pretty practically oriented. And so let me just start with, I think, the most important thing of all, which is we don't get to choose at this point whether artificial intelligence is coming or not. It's here. So this conversation is not going to be much about whether AI will affect your work. It's going to be more about whether you want to take a proactive role in shaping how it affects work as a leader, or whether you want to be reactive. And obviously, I'm going to propose that proactive is the way to go. So in terms of just agenda, I thought we could cover a few topics. First, just kind of generally grounding ourselves on what AI is, specifically from a leadership perspective. So I'm not going to do a tech deep dive. We're going to be really thinking more in the world of mental models and how AI is reshaping leadership versus teaching you about machine learning or algorithms. And then I'd like to really make this as practical as possible and give you a toolkit to use, and ultimately also spend time on the non-technology part of AI, which I think is very meaningful, which is the human dimension, the ethics, the culture, and the workforce questions that come up as leaders as you continue to sort of implement AI. I will be doing my best to monitor. There's the question and answer feature. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit those at your convenience, and I will do my best to answer all those questions as we go. I'll also try and keep an eye on the chat as well, but I can tell you I'll be paying more attention to the question and answers for questions. So before we get started, I wanted to just kind of get a sense. Thank you all for sharing where you're working. It's really cool to see such a diverse set of industries and organizations represented. I also want to get a sense really quickly of where you are sort of in your AI adoption cycle from a leadership perspective. So if you could do me a favor and just read the four potential responses that kind of reflect a range of adoption and drop the letter in the chat that best represents where you are. Okay, so I'm getting a pretty good flavor here. There's a lot of A's and B's and then a smattering of C's. So it sounds like most of the folks on this call are either just starting their AI journey or really using it for personal use, but have not thought about how to start to push AI out to their teams. Great. So regardless of where you currently are, hopefully there will be some value in the conversation that we have in the time we have together. Let me begin by just trying to ground you on what AI is and is not. And for the technical folks on this call, you'll need to forgive me right now, but this is not going to be a computer science class. So I'm not going to spend any time technically describing what AI is and isn't. What I'm really going to try and do is more give you a working mental model to kind of think about it. So, in a nutshell, at its core, AI is about systems that can perform tasks that we used to think required human intelligence. So pattern recognition, language generation, predictions, and the thing that we are most exposed to as leaders right now in the AI universe is generative AI, and specifically LLMs or large language models. So large language models are what we see when we're using tools like ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, Claude, Gemini, Grok, and so on. Now, one of the things that I think is equally important to kind of get grounded on is what AI is not. AI is most definitely not a solution to everything. It does not replace strategic thinking. Despite sometimes how it feels to us, it is not fully autonomous. It is not self-aware. Um, and even though it always sounds very confident in what it's saying and doing, it's not always accurate. So it can and does make things up at times. And I think the most really important thing to think about when you're thinking about AI is velocity. So AI is not static. And there's never going to be a day where you'll be able to say, I know AI, because what you know today will be obsolete within weeks or months. Um, and that is a very unique thing. So think about AI more as a leader as a learning journey that never ends, that's exciting, that always has something new to offer, but that is certainly something that's persistent and that goes on over time. And I would argue that as a result, the leaders that will be the best suited to deal with AI are the ones that not necessarily know the most at any given point in time, but are the ones that have the courage to stay curious and continue to learn. And most importantly, use their knowledge to help enhance strategy. That to me is the purpose of leadership. So let me give you a sense of the scale that we're talking about, because as I mentioned, part of what makes AI fundamentally different than other technologies in the past is the speed with which it's evolving and changing. So, like it or not, 77% of the people you lead are already using AI tools, and very frequently without any formal approval from their employer. This means that AI adoption is happening with or without leadership direction and with or without leadership support. So, one of the first questions you have to wrap your arms around as a leader is, do you want to shape that adoption, or do you want to just react to what your users are doing? And I see, Stephanie, you raised your hand. If you have a question, could you put it in the chat and I'll try and answer it? Okay, so in addition to that's happening regardless, um, the economic impact is staggering. So there's just huge numbers being thrown around by folks, um, $15 trillion. But I think to me, the more concrete thing is the last bullet I've got on this slide, which is according to the World Economic Forum, 40% of global workforce skills will be disrupted in the next 3 years. So we're not talking generations here. We're talking about velocity where 40% of the tasks and skills that people have will somehow be affected by AI over the next 3 years. That's pretty crazy. I will tell you the productivity gains are real. I've experienced them personally. I've experienced them in organizations that I currently manage. Um, Current reports are 2 to 4x improvements on specific knowledge tasks like drafting communication, analysis, research, summarization. So the net of this is your teams are already on this. They're already doing it. They're already experimenting, sometimes haphazardly, sometimes with focus. They're making decisions about AI adoption at the individual level, as many of you who put B in your answer are already doing as well. And they're going to do that whether you have guardrails for them, whether you've given them guidelines or not, whether you're giving them training or not. So I'm a big fan of becoming very proactive and viewing this as a great leadership opportunity to shape the way your organizations adopt AI. So um, let me give you a few things to think about in that context. So I think you've probably been on a lot of calls, or maybe you haven't, but just explored AI for individual use and AI for work in general terms. But I think it's important, and part of the purpose of this webinar is to talk about how specifically as a leader, your role is different in terms of how you use AI and how you deploy AI and how you guide your team with AI. So I really want to try and zero in on those things. And again, like I said, I'm definitely perfectly happy to not make this a monotone presentation for the next 30 minutes or so. So if you have questions, feel free to either put them in the chat as I'm going along or in the Q&A section. So from a decision-making perspective, I can tell you from firsthand experience, AI is completely transformative. It has the ability to synthesize data and find patterns in information that you would have never been able to do without it. It does it on the scope of data with which it does it on, and the speed with which it does it is incredible. And so, from a leadership perspective, that creates an extraordinary situation. It allows leaders to shift more and more from intuition led to evidence augmented decisions, right? We get to have data to support our decision making. Does that mean intuition is not important? Absolutely not. Does that mean that humans shouldn't still be making the ultimate decisions? Of course not. But what it does mean is that we now have the ability to make decisions that are far more informed and data driven than ever before. Now, there's a risk with that. And the risk is to over rely on AI and not add the human element, or also to ignore the fact that it's a garbage in, garbage out. So if your data that's being analyzed is biased in any way or incomplete in any way, AI is just amplifying that. So the word of caution is while there's an opportunity from a decision-making perspective for AI to profoundly affect the amount of information we have to better inform our decisions, we also have to be very aware of becoming over-reliant or ignoring the fact that our data in and of itself might be biased or inaccurate. But I do think decision-making is one huge impact area on leadership. The second one is actually, I think, not talked about enough and underappreciated, but AI has a profound impact on leaders from a people perspective. And what you're going to find, if you haven't already seen this, is your teams are going to become increasingly split between those that are AI native, AI fluent, those that are AI hesitant, AI skeptic. So there's going to be a wide range of adoption across your team, from people that are at the cutting edge and really open to experimentation, and people that are very resistant and that feel threatened. And AI will create a significant number of new roles, both within existing job descriptions, but also completely new jobs. But it'll also create the destruction of roles, and that has huge people effects. So I think a big takeaway that I want you all to take from this is leaders who treat AI implementation and adoption as purely a technology rollout are missing a huge, huge piece of the equation. And that all AI policies and rollouts have to be complemented with a human change management element that involves making sure that your team trusts the process, making sure that they feel psychologically safe, making sure that you're managing the pace of change. Um, those are going to be hugely important. And I think I'll come back to that a little bit later, but I definitely wanted to set the stage for we're not talking about technology here. You can't talk about AI as a technology without talking about the people element as well. And then the third main area I wanted to highlight in terms of impact on leadership is from an organizational strategy perspective. So, startups that are coming out now are AI native from day one, but existing enterprises may be encumbered and not have the AI nimbleness that a startup does. And the thing that's amazing is just like AI as a technology changes very quickly, AI enables businesses to change very quickly and disrupt very quickly. And so, business models that may have taken years or decades to build, AI can potentially disrupt in a matter of weeks or months. And so, I think as leaders, what you're going to see is a general compression in the amount of time that you have to benefit from a competitive advantage that you develop from a business model before AI can disrupt that. So that's kind of one important thing. And then the other important thing I would urge you to think about is the last question I have on this slide, which is um, I still fundamentally believe that humans make strategies and managers and leaders decide on the vision and the general objectives of an organization. And so I think it's very important as a leader that you're constantly asking yourself the question, not only what decisions can AI help, but what decisions do I never want AI to help me make? What decisions need to stay uniquely human? Just checking. Okay, I don't see any questions. So let's talk about some opportunities, some very real ones. So um, I kind of tried to narrow it down to the ones that I thought would be most directly applicable to leaders in an organization. And I got it down to four main ones and two emerging ones. So I wanted to kind of talk about these in a very high level. So innovation. One of the if you're in an organization and you're involved at all with an innovation practice, one of the biggest costs to innovation is the cost of experimentation, right? So you need the organizational patience and culture to let you experiment because experimentation takes time and resources and may or may not work out. And by experimentation and innovation, that could be tons of different things. It could be testing a new market opportunity. It could be determining whether a new policy framework would work or not. It could be testing a marketing strategy or an advertising strategy or communication strategy. It could be running a financial analysis and sort of building out an entire new product or business model. And across all of those things, the commonality for AI is it profoundly reduces the cost, profoundly. And I think about the most recent startup that I have worked on that's actually in the travel space. Probably what I compressed 3 months, 4 months of market research, experimentation, product validation, product market fit into 10 days um, at zero cost, essentially. So that is, I think, an amazing opportunity for leaders driving innovation in the organization to profoundly augment the number of experiments that can be done, the number of things that can be done, um, both from a speed and a cost perspective. So I think that's one. The second thing I would say is strategic intelligence. So I think that one of the things as leaders, at least one of the things I've always wanted to know is what are my competitors doing? What are the market forces doing? How are they going to impact my business? How are they going to impact my customers' business? And as a result, my business. And that was the task of many, many people to gather that intelligence. And a lot of times, by the time uh, we got that information, it was stale because it took the time to gather it, it took money to gather it, and so on. Um, AI provides the ability to synthesize massive amounts of information instantaneously and distill it into knowledge that is consumable and insightful and immediately usable by leaders. So I think at this point, for me and all of the businesses that I'm involved in, we pretty much have AI tools that are constantly scanning all available information on the internet for market trends, economic trends, political trends, competitive trends, and compiling that information and synthesizing it into a small set of insights that can be used to improve strategic decision making. And that is something that in no way would have been possible in a pre-AI world. We wouldn't have been able to look at that amount of information. We wouldn't have been able to synthesize it, and we wouldn't have been able to make it usable at a cost and at a time, an amount of time that would have been relevant. So I think that's pretty amazing. Um, and then there's probably the next two areas, operational efficiency and communication, are probably the two that you're most familiar with. But I would say from an operations perspective, drafting, routine communication, doing data analysis, um, writing communication reports, public, summarizing meetings, all those kinds of things are like crazy helpful, right? I think right now, I don't think I've taken notes at a meeting that I've been at in months. And it's just so unbelievably valuable to have meeting notes from all the meetings that I've attended, summaries, action item lists, follow-up emails drafted within seconds versus having to kind of spend a lot of time doing that. So I think that's a very obvious one. And, you know, doing this kind of stuff is something that leaders do a ton of. And so it really has a huge effect on the day-to-day efficiency and productivity of leaders. And then risk detection from a network infrastructure data perspective, I think is important. But as an educator, talent development is one of the things that I'm also very excited about. The the magic of AI is it provides the ability to train people in a way that is meaningful to them and highly personalized. That was never possible before. So at the nonprofit that I run, we have leadership development, and it's so easy. We'll work on individual development plans for the leaders every year on the skills they want to develop, and then we just work with our AI tools to create the curriculum and create a learning style and learning curriculum that's perfectly suited to the leader in question. And so that's amazing as well. So the point here is to give you some examples, but what you ultimately need to do as leaders and be very deliberate, right? Figure out where you spend the most time. And as a result, where you can leverage AI the most to have it impact you from a productivity standpoint, but also from a decision-making standpoint. So again, I don't want to be the person that just paints the perfect picture for AI. Lots of challenges. Let's be real honest about this. To not paint a too pretty of a picture, people are freaked out about what AI could do to their jobs. Is it going to make them obsolete? Is it going to obsolete some of their skills? So that's something that leaders are going to have to deal with, is the psychological uncertainty that AI creates. Also, I can't emphasize this enough. Um, you cannot compromise your organizational standards over AI. So AI is never going to create perfection. AI, the way I see it, is it produces really, really high quality drafts of things very quickly, but ultimately you as a leader own quality control, review, and making sure that what's being produced is consistent with your organizational standards. The other, I think, challenge is the speed trap. And the way I think about this is AI is fast, but fast, just like when we're not involving AI, fast doesn't mean good. Just was the same thing with AI. Fast doesn't always mean good. So I would encourage everyone to not sacrifice, nuance, reflection, good judgment, just for velocity. So make sure that you and your people are not just trying to be fast, but they're being faster while not compromising quality. Data governance, I think, is one of the most urgent things for every organization right now, because your employees are already pasting proprietary information into AI tools. And so you owe it to them to have clear policies on what can and can't be done. And you owe it to your company from a liability perspective to, as quickly as possible, have clear policies in place on what can and cannot be used, what data can and cannot be put into AI tools, which AI tools can and cannot be used, and so on. And I'll come back to this a little later. And then ultimately, culture is a big thing. So what you'll find, and what at least what I found, is some of my best historical performers and most experienced people are frequently the people that feel the most threatened and are the most resistant to AI. And I think this is a point where leadership really matters a lot in terms of helping to get those people on board with the changes that are coming. So let me kind of, now that we've done that overview, let me transition to just 3 specific things that I think you could start doing today, so that you can try and get some immediate value. So, and like I said before, the thing here that matters the most is your specific context. So take the industry that you're in, take the work that you do, and think about which, if any of these things, would be the most impactful. So I mentioned briefly already communication. I think communication productivity is a very obvious immediate thing to do with AI. And my experience is that everybody gets inundated with this, but leaders especially do. So here's my practical advice: stop writing first drafts. Period. So for email, whether it's a memo, a summary presentation, a slide deck, whatever it is, just get out of the business of writing first drafts. Use AI to generate that first 80%. And then add your insight, your expertise, your context, your organization's context, to flesh out the remaining 20%. So you don't want to stop at the 80%, because then you basically have a generic thing that everybody else also has. But you also don't want to do all 100%, because that's very inefficient at this point. So let me give you a couple of concrete examples, right? Let's say you need to communicate an upcoming organizational change to your team, right? Instead of basically staring at your screen trying to figure out where to start, write an AI prompt that just says, hey, ChatGPT as an example, draft a team communication about this upcoming organizational change, describe the change, acknowledging uncertainty, emphasizing our values of transparency and respect, and inviting questions. 20 seconds later, you'll have a first draft. Is it going to be perfect? Of course it's not going to be perfect. So then from there, you edit it to make sure it's in your voice. You edit it to make sure the right things are captured. But at the end of the day, instead of spending 45 to 60 minutes trying to figure out how to say something, you spend 10. And these time savings are not hypothetical. Over to the right of this slide, I've showed you some basically percentage upticks that research has shown around email drafting, meeting summaries, first reports, research synthesis, and so on. Right? And again, I cannot overemphasize enough. Those are huge productivity gains, but you cannot become over-reliant on AI. You still have to review the AI outputs for accuracy. You have to add your tone, your context, essentially make it yours with that other 20%. Full disclosure, AI, Claude generated the first 80% of the presentation I'm giving you today in less than 30 minutes. And then I spent a few more hours making it my own. But what I didn't do is spend 8 hours researching and working on a presentation from scratch. So I think this is a really great example of something that you can start doing today with AI as a leader. So the second thing is strategic planning. So I think this is also super exciting for leaders, right? I mentioned competitive intelligence, so the work that AI tools can do with competitive intelligence. I mentioned data synthesis, but also just scenario planning. So let me give you some specific examples of this. So in the one of the things that we do at all the organizations that I run is every year we have an employee engagement survey. And so this year, what I did is I just uploaded all the results, comments, everything on the employee engagement survey for all of my organizations. And I just let AI run it. I said, okay, run an analysis, look at this data, tell me what you see, tell me any patterns you see, and then generate 3 slides with just plain language insights of areas where we're doing well, areas for improvement, and other areas, other insights. And that was it. It was a 5 minute ordeal for me to look at the data for our employee engagement and give meaningful information back to our employees and talk to them about what we're going to do. Another example is um, we built a financial analysis and business plan for a new business model that we were exploring. We built out the entire spreadsheet, and then we basically had AI stress test it. And we said, look at our spreadsheet and figure out all of the places that there's inherent risk, what the potential upsides and downsides are, and sort of the extreme positions that could get us into trouble. And it did that very, very quickly. So, so those are some great examples of strategic planning. I could go on that, and maybe in Q&A we can go more into that. And I see both of the questions. I'm going to get to those right after I finish this slide because I think it ties into it. So I've mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation, but to me, what makes or breaks this whole thing is what you do with your team, right? And if people are terrified of AI or it's not equitably distributed or they're not trained, I think this is a problem. So this speaks a little bit to Brooke's question as well. So how do you convert resistant people into AI advocates? I think the first thing I would recommend is just model the behavior, right? So if you use it and you show the benefits that you're receiving from it, and you show that sometimes using it doesn't come to the right outcomes, right? The more you can model the right way to use AI, the more that will help you win converts to the cause. And coupled very closely with that is psychological safety. So in general, this is just change management, but obviously AI is a change management is a big part of this, is your team is not going to experiment with AI if they're afraid of looking stupid or doing something wrong. So the more you can create explicit permission to try, fail, and learn in an environment where experimentation is not only supported but appreciated, and that learning lessons being shared is valued, I think that's a really, really big thing that you can do. And the way to do that is model it yourself and then also celebrate and share wins that others have had from AI adoption. Um, Now, that being said, I think data governance is non-negotiable. So before you encourage your team to use AI tools, I think you need a very clear and explicit policy about how they can use the tools, which tools they can use, and what the consequences are for misuse of the tools. And it's not bureaucracy, it's about protecting your people and protecting your organization from risk and liability. Last but not least, the biggest mistake I see is people saying, managers saying, we're going to use AI. And then they expect people to do that. Well, I mean, it's kind of like saying, imagine in school if somebody said, we're going to use calculus, but then they never taught you calculus. That's not how it works. So telling people to use AI more is poor leadership, right? Giving people training on how to use the AI, giving them use cases, telling them what the tools are that are approved, creating clear guardrails, encouraging experimentation, right? That is good leadership, right? That is good team enablement. And no matter what, don't forget that humans are at the center of this. I really believe that. So I think that's a really, really important thing to me. So let me go through these questions real quick. I think, Brooke, I sort of was trying to answer the question, which is the more you can model the behavior and demonstrate the benefits, I think the more likely you are to get adoption and support. You're never going to be able to eliminate all resistance, and that's something that sort of, I think will self-correct because, in my opinion, we're very going to quickly going to end up in a world where those that are not using AI can't keep up. So I think that's how I'd answer that. Favorite AI tools from an anonymous attendee. I'm all over the place. So I maintain multiple subscriptions because what I've found is number one, different tools get better or worse at different things. So I actually maintain a subscription to Gemini, to ChatGPT, to Claude's Anthropic, to Grok, and then through work I also have Copilot, which is essentially ChatGPT. So I try and bounce around a lot, and I find benefit for a couple of reasons. One is I see that certain tools are better or worse than other things. The second thing that I like to do is I like to play the tools off of each other. So, for example, when I created this presentation, I had ChatGPT create a draft of the presentation for me based on a pretty extensive prompt. And then I took the presentation draft that ChatGPT created and pasted it into Claude. And I said, Claude, ChatGPT created this. I know you can make it better. Go ahead and do that and then turn it into a deck for me. So that's another example of kind of how I play the tools um, off against each other. Um, and then the third question that I wanted, I think is probably a good time to just very briefly answer is resources to suggest how to engage with AI intelligently. I think AI is a great resource to suggest how to engage with AI intelligently. So a lot of times I will have conversations with AI on how I can better use it and what things I could do better. And then I listen to a bunch of podcasts and then for those of you that have a marketing slant, there's a company called Marketing AI Institute that has really good AI literacy resources online. Not all are free, but a good chunk are. And they also have a podcast, and I found them very valuable in talking about like the kinds of things that you can do. So hopefully that's a little bit of extra guidance. I'm going to move on, but I hope to have some time at the end for other Q&A as well. Um, okay, so I think this is again, if I haven't made it clear enough, I think the human dimension is super important. So I think it's very important that if AI has been involved in a decision that affects someone, um, so that someone could be, a performance review, a hiring decision, whatever, I think you should disclose that. You shouldn't wait for regulators to tell you need to disclose it. That's something that I think you should disclose. I think you should be very, very cognizant that AI systems are systems that learn patterns from historical information, meaning that if the historical information um, is inaccurate or biased, AI will just amplify that bias. So we have to be very careful about that. When you're talking to your AI vendors, every vendor you should ask, where does your data go? Who gets trained on it? Is my data being used to improve a model that my competitors can access? Like, this is not paranoia. This is wanting to understand what a critical lifeblood of your business is being used for. I think there's always a human dignity element, right? So I think some decisions should never be delegated to AI. There's obvious ones: disciplinary action, mental health. I work in a mental health nonprofit. Mental health decisions. My analogy is super simple. Like I might be fine at some point with an AI radiologist diagnosing me with cancer, but I want a human to tell me. And so I think that's something to just keep in mind. Um, Also recognize that when AI makes a decision that causes harm, the AI is not liable. You are. Your company is. So you need to really, really think carefully about that. So to start to bring this in, because we're already 45 minutes in, surprisingly, I've kind of got a very basic 4 C's of an AI leader. So the first C is curiosity. An AI leader isn't necessarily a technology expert. They're just genuinely curious. And I also think the employees that I've found that use AI the best share that characteristic, right? They don't dismiss AI as not my job to understand, not something I want, et cetera. They basically approach it the way they were everything else, with some curiosity, ask questions, read, experiment, learn. I think that's a very, very important trait. Critical. So curiosity without a good, healthy amount of skepticism is dangerous. So I think it's always an important thing to remember that as impressive as AI tools are, just like humans, they're not infallible. And so make sure that whatever is coming out, you read carefully about that, right? You say, is this accurate? Is this complete? Is this corresponding to our organization's values and so on? Courage. So um, you have to model the example. So if you are experimenting visibly, if you're sharing what works and what doesn't, what you've learned with AI, then you are creating the psychological safety for your team to do the same. And that's essential. And then ultimately compassion, right? This is creating a stressful moment, and a compassionate leader stays in tune to the emotional dimensions of AI, right? The fear, the uncertainty, the access equity. You don't dismiss those as somebody being resistant to the thing. You address that from a change management perspective as a compassionate leader. So I think those are my four most important C's. So what can you do going forward over the next 90 days? I would suggest, especially for those of you that are A's or even the early stage B's, um, just start doing something. Pick something super low stakes. Like, hey, I want to draft this communication. I want to summarize this document. I want to brainstorm what I should put on this meeting agenda. Just start, right? And experiment, right? And then have a clear understanding at the same time about what your organization's current AI policy is, and ask your team, because as we talked about, 77% of them are already doing stuff. So see what they're doing. Have conversations with them. Once you pass that information gathering stage, then you're ready to start building, right? Start making some structural moves. I gave you three examples, but find out what are the two or three things in your workflow where AI could generally affect quality, speed, or both, right? And then create a policy around how to use AI to improve those workflows. Even if it's a simple one, train your people on it, be very visible about both how long it's taking you to figure out and the learning obstacles, and get things going, right? And see how things go. At that point, you should have enough scale to start really kind of turning your experimentation from random experimentation to structured experimentation to now actual strategy, right? Based on what you learned from your early AI adoption, start building AI strategies that connect to your organization's goals. Make sure that people are being trained and given access to the AI tools they need to be successful, and establish your own rhythm for staying current on what's going on with AI. Because as I mentioned, it's not I'll check in once a month. It's every week you need to know what's going on and stay up to date. And again, the cool thing is the very tool that's evolving is the tool that helps you stay up to date. So I have AI tools now that'll basically go listen to a ton of podcasts for me, summarize them for me, and create a briefing report for the week. And I'll read that. And then if something particularly sounds interesting to me, I know which podcast it came from, and I'll go listen to the full podcast. Right. So we have the tools at our disposal to stay up to date. We just need to use those. So before I open it up to full Q&A, I do see there's another question that I will address as the first question of the Q&A, right? I'd like to just leave you with some basic things. So there was an interesting study that MIT performed, and they had basically the same task done by just a human, just an AI further augmented by human intervention, and then a human further augmented by AI. And what the study found is by far the most successful outcome was human augmented AI. So have the AI do the 80%, and then the human augments it with the remaining 20%. So just remember, AI augments human judgment. It does not replace it. Speed without quality is not progress. So be careful of that speed trap. I mentioned this a million times, but Your team's experience of change is just as important as the technology itself. Curiosity is absolutely a leadership competency, as is ethical leadership, meaning proactive governance. And ultimately, an AI strategy is not a strategy unless it directly links to your organization's values and purpose and not just looking for efficiency. So, in my opinion, the future of work very much looks like leaders who are thoughtful, curious, and human. Um, Even as the tools around them become increasingly intelligent, engagement is not optional. This technology is here. So the leaders of the future are the leaders that take a proactive approach uh, to harnessing the power of AI and contextualizing it to their organization. So I wanted to make sure I had 10 minutes for Q&A. So here we are at Q&A. And let me start with the two questions that I see out there. Um, so one of them is about water and resources and electricity. And I think there's a lot of information coming out on this right now, but without going into a tremendous amount of detail, because this could be a whole 2 hour lecture, I will say that the large language model makers are very, very in tune with the fact that they are large consumers of mainly electricity. Actually, believe it or not, a lot of the water is fully recycled. Um, and I think they're going to be taking proactive action to deal with that. Part of it is because I think they care more than we think, but part of it I think is also it's a business need because they cannot get enough electricity from the grid to power the data centers that they need. So, and just hot off the presses, I actually interviewed two Google executives this morning for a different panel that I was doing at McCombs, and one of the Google execs very clearly said that their strategy is to basically take their data centers off grid and essentially generate their own power for their own requirements. So I think you're going to see, to whoever asked that anonymous question, I think you're going to see more and more information this year come out and data around actual consumption around water, actual consumption around electricity, and what actual strategies from these large technology companies on what they're going to do to start offsetting that. And I think they're going to do it both for self-serving public relations reasons, but they're also going to do it because the business demands it. So hopefully you'll be able to see more and more on that. But yeah, I think there's definitely a lot going on in that space. And then prompt writing training or resources. So honestly, I think we're rapidly evolving away from prompt writing and more conversational AI. So what I mean by that is I would say the biggest amount of discussions I have with my AI are actually true conversations where I'm actually talking to it. And then once that conversation is over, I will ask it to improve the prompt itself. So I use the tool to help me be better at what I'm doing. So I don't have any specific resources or training. My answer to that question would be more get in the habit of talking to your AI like it's an adult and an expert versus like it's a Google search bar. I think that's the biggest piece of advice I give you there. I would say going up to Josh's comment, what is the best AI tool to use for analyzing raw data? I think all of the top LLMs are very, very good at looking at raw data. I've had a lot of good luck with Claude and with ChatGPT on that. I would say for generating graphics, I think that's a taste-oriented thing, but personally, where I've had the most success is with Google Gemini's Nano Banana tools. I think they do a lot of sort of really good infographic kind of work. If you're talking about like pure images and stuff like that, I would say specialized tools are going to be better um, for you, like Midjourney or something like that. So podcasts that I listen to, so Valentina, your question, like I said, use AI to just scan all podcasts, but what I chase is not necessarily the podcast itself. I chase the technology execs. So when any executive from a top AI technology company is on a podcast, I don't care whose podcast it is. I want to listen to that. So that's kind of where I'm going. as opposed to picking a specific podcast. I did mention the Marketing AI Institute podcast. That's useful for the marketing field for things that are going on there. There's also a YouTube channel. He's a super casual kind of a Southern California surfer dude called Matt Wolf. He does a really fun sort of AI news of the week that he drops on Fridays on YouTube. It's about 30 minutes of what's going on, but I like him because he'll do very, very practical stuff. Like he'll show you how to use stuff. So that's something else that I typically will always listen to and watch. All right, so let me go back down to Amanda. Recommends list of trying pros tools and employee leadership. Yeah, I mean, so I think the way that you avoid being replaced as an employee is you become the human augmenting the AI, right? And so I think the employees that are going to be replaced are not the ones recommending AI tools and demonstrating that they have expertise and knowledge and are doing great things with AI tools. It's going to be the ones that aren't because they're going to look less and less productive, and they're going to get less and less done. So I think if you're in a position where you're proposing an AI tool to your leadership, you're demonstrating that you're experimenting and competent. If you have enlightened leadership, that'll put you at the top of the pack, not at the bottom. Because I think one of the other lessons here is just, remembering that human augmented AI is better than everything else. Um, okay. And then I guess one thing that I wanted to say is I am currently working with Extended Campus and others are as well to roll out other sessions and classes that provide far more detail because obviously I'm not going to be able to cover everything on this call. So stay tuned for those things as well. Um, and Oh, it's right on cue. Dom just posted it. And then I have 3 minutes, so I'm going to just milk as much as I can on. So there's one more anonymous question that I see that I wanted to address, which is where is it? Can you provide examples of where an organization should or should not use AI? I think um, really it's that's an impossible question to answer. It's dependent on the organization. So what I would encourage you to do though is like I was saying earlier, understand what the critical workflows are where AI could have a meaningful productivity or quality impact, which can change organization to organization, and really focus in your efforts on using AI there as much as possible. And then I thought there was one question I wanted to, yeah, Josh asked, what is Copilot most useful for? I'm going to be real candid. I don't think Copilot is super useful. It's getting better. I think once Copilot is fully integrated into all of the Microsoft 365 tools, very similar to how Google is implementing Gemini across their entire tool set and platform, it will be wildly useful. And that should be soon. That's coming. But I long for the day where everything in my OneDrive and all my Microsoft apps, et cetera, is at my fingertips and I can interrogate and search across all that using Copilot and build new content based on that. So I think once we get that, Copilot will be unbelievably useful at enterprise level. Until we get there, I think it's probably not something that I would spend a whole lot of time on compared to the other large language models. I think we're right at time, but I wanted to thank everybody for joining. I'm hopeful that you got something out of this. And if so, I'd love to see you in one of the future classes. But thank you so much for attending the webinar today. I appreciate it.